In this lecture, we're going to take a look at two different methods of generating meshes inside of Zbrush. They're called Shadowbox and Mesh Extraction, and both of them are based around masking. So we'll begin with mesh extraction. We've got our alien bust here, and let's say that we want to create some kind of a headpiece for this character. I'm going to start by drawing a mask. And of course, whenever you're masking, the quality of your mask is totally dependent upon the underlying resolution of the mesh that you're painting on. However dense that mesh is going to determine how sharp and clean the edges of your mask are. So because of that, I want to make sure that I'm at the highest subdivision level when I paint this mask. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to mask out where I want this alien's helmet to sit. Make sure that it's got little allowances here for the antenna. Let's go ahead and bring this up and around and down. Come around to the back of the head here. Just mask out the base of the skull. And I'll hold down Control and Alt to subtract from the mask here in the front. Bring it to a little widow's peak, like that. And let's clean up the edges around here. Just make sure that this is nice and sharp. Now I could hold down the Control key, and in my masking brush, I do have the ability to change to mask circle. And if I click on the stroke, I can set this to square and center. So if I Control, click, Alt, and drag, I can make a perfectly circular unmasked area. Press the space bar, you can shift that around. Then when I let go, it will unmask that area. Now it does project through at that angle, so it unmasks that bit there. So I'll just go back to my mask pen. Let's mask this area out. And then I'll go back to the mask circle, and once again, Control Alt, click and drag, and we'll make an unmasked region here, and just place that right over the ear. Turn off perspective mode because we were getting a little distortion there. Press the space bar to shift that around and then unmask, and we get this nice kind of arc there that gives some allowance for the ear and this little sideburn piece there. So this is a nice mask to represent the geometry that we're ultimately going to get from extraction. Now we go to the subtool menu. Under the subtool menu, we open up Extract. So let's zoom in here so we can see. And I click Extract. Now our thickness is set to 0.02. And as you can see, it's resulting in about that thickness, which is actually pretty good. This is a preview though. If I move the model, it disappears. So that's not actual geometry yet. So let's make it a little bit smaller. Let's make it 0.018. Extract. And there we go. We get our extraction again. It looks pretty good. Now I'm going to click Accept. Now that actually commits and generates a piece of geometry in the subtool menu, and that's our extraction. Control, click, and drag on the background to clear the mask. And let's go back to our masking brush. Let's go back to mask pen. Now if we go to frame mode, you can see that this is just evenly spaced quad mesh. Interestingly, we're picking up polygroups here. I've got a polygroup for the outer shell. Let's go to Display Properties and turn on double-sided. Makes it easier to see those. We have the thickness polygroup. And then we have the inner shell. You see that's the exact mirror of the surface that I masked. So let's go back into frame mode. Now there's a couple things we can do to clean this up. If I go to deformation, I have some sliders here. I have polish by features. If I turn that on and then turn that slider up, it will polish it down and clean up the edges a little bit, as you can see there. I can Control Shift click to isolate the outer shell, and then we can polish this a few more times. That's a little too much, so let's turn that down. I can take polish by groups, and let's make all the polygroups visible again. If I polish by groups, and that's going to polish each individual polygroup. So now we have a nice polished surface that maintains the sharp edges. I'm going to isolate the outer shell and mask it. invert that mask and take my smooth brush and smooth the mesh. So what I did was I isolated the outer shell so I could mask the inner shell and the thickness, and that preserves the underlayers. So even though we're smoothing, it will still keep the shell laying against the surface. Now I want to add some detail to this, but before we do that, I want to remesh it. So we've got a more solid, clean underlying topology. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Geometry, Z-Remesher, and let's go to Detect Edges. That detects the sharp edges, and click Z-Remesher. And that's going to retopologize this helmet to 5,000 faces. Because I have Detect Edges turned on, it's going to hopefully preserve those edges and keep that sharp quality. So let that process, and there we go. There's our remesh. If we go into frame mode, you can see quite a nice topology that was generated automatically, but it did not preserve the polygroups. Those polygroups are quite handy, so I'm going to undo that and turn on Keep Groups and then Z-remesh it again. And the Z-remesher should now respect and maintain those underlying polygroups in the remeshed version. So we'll let that work through the remeshing process. And there we go. So if we Control-Shift-Click on each group, you see that they are maintained. So let's hide the outer shell, hide the thickness, mask the inner shell, and then reveal everything again by Control-Shift-Clicking on the background. So pretty happy with that. Actually, let's clear that mask. I'm going to divide a couple times. Now what I want to do is I want to add a little bit of detail to this. So what I can do is go to Noisemaker. If you haven't seen the video yet on Noisemaker, I encourage you to take a look at it. It's a very interesting tool. Go to Surface and turn on Noise. Zoom out a bit so we can see it. Go to Noise Plug, and that opens up the Noisemaker plugin. So there's a few different procedural options here. We can use hex tiles, nested shapes, psychedelic, scales. There's all sorts of different procedural shapes that we can use as surface noise. Let's go ahead and pick up hex tiles. Click OK. And this adds this hex tile texture here. I'll turn the plugin scale down and turn the strength up so we can actually see it, and turn down mix basic noise. Now it's a 3D projection, so the stretching is happening here, and I don't really want that, so I'm going to go to my adjust angle around the x-axis there, and you see that changes the direction of the projection. So if I do that, now the stretching is happening along the sides here and the back. Now, if I had UV coordinates, I could avoid the stretching entirely. So if you wanted to be perfect, you would probably want to use UV master to create UVs, and then we could project into UV space. Because it's such an organized projection, let's go with something a little bit less geometrical. Let's go to, let's see, let's do Veroni. That's always a nice alien texture. So that's a nice kind of texture there. And let's use color blend. Switch the color blend down here. Let's make it purple. There we go. So I do like the look of that. Switch over here to this color. Let's make that dark green. There we go. I'm quite happy with that color blend. I'm turning the strength up a little bit and then click OK. And that gives me this texture on the helmet. I can go into Edit and I can change my strength to a negative value, which will actually make it feel more like it's a hammered kind of metal. If I turn up the plugin size, this will actually work a bit better. So let's click OK, and now that feels more like a hammered metal. So I'm going to click divide a couple more times, get up to 2 million polygons, and then click Apply to Mesh, and then that bakes that down to the model. Now if I mask my noise, I get a mask based on that actual noise that we just applied. I can sharpen this by Control-Alt-clicking on it. Go to our poly paint, Make sure we're on spray and RGB is on the brush. Sample color just by clicking and dragging. And then I can just spray color onto this. And I'm spraying in between the masked areas. It's a little too close to the base tone, so let's do green. And let's paint green into that. So that's painting all the in-between areas. Clear the mask, and now you see we have this interesting kind of texture. I'm going to get rid of the poly paint by going to RGB, selecting white and go to color, fill object. Oops, turn up our RGB intensity, and then do that again. And then I'm going to change my material. Let's change it to sort of a green metallic. Turn on material, then go to color, fill object, and that fills the object with that material selection. So this is mesh extraction. You can create any type of shape that you can mask out on the surface of the underlying mesh, and then extract that into a new piece of geometry. I then retopologize and continue to sculpt in detail. Now let's take a look at another method of generating meshes inside of Zbrush, and that's called Shadowbox. So to access Shadowbox, go to the Lightbox, go to the Project folder, and inside the Project folder you'll find a variety of subfolders here. There's 3D printing, demo projects, jewelry, etc. We'll open up demo projects, and within then you'll find Shadowbox 128. Open that by double-clicking on it, and you get what looks like this cube here. It is a back, right, and bottom view cube. Now turn off perspective. Now the way Shadowbox works is, if you go to the tool menu, open up geometry, and open up Shadowbox, here you see the Shadowbox is generated by clicking this button here. There's also a button for polish. If I draw a mask, hold down Control and draw a mask here on the right view, it will generate geometry based on that mask. I'll turn on transparency so we can see through it. If I erase from the mask here, it will erase that geometry in that area. So currently, the circular mask is making the shape. If I go to the back view and then I draw a rectangular mask, it will limit the depth of that other mask. Now I've got a mask here and down here, but there's no geometry being created on the unmasked areas because this is being limited. Now if I go to the top view, and let's make another mask, again, it's bigger than the geometry that's being generated, but it's being limited by this mask here. If I come to the top view though, and then I erase out a circle here, I'll have a circle that's erased out through the geometry. Now when I'm happy with this, I simply turn off Shadowbox, and now I have a piece of geometry. Let's change the basic to the basic material too, so we see a little bit better. There we go. Now, the resolution of the Shadowbox was set to 128. You see this slider here. If I were to increase that, let's bring it up to 512. And then turn on Shadowbox again, it will recreate that original mask, clear the masks, and the geometry goes away. And let's do another bit of masking here. I'm going to hold down the Control key, access my masking brush, and let's change to drag rectangle. And I'm going to go to my texture menu, and I'm going to import a texture. Let's import this tattoo stencil here. Select that. I'm going to select that texture and click Make Alpha, and that turns that into an alpha. Now I'm going to go to the Alpha menu and click Invert, so it's white on black. Press Control, make sure that we have that alpha selected. I'm going to turn my draw size up and my focal shift all the way down, so there's no vignette. Control, click and drag, and that's going to draw that mask onto the surface. Now if we rotate, you see that's the object that we get. Now I'm going to go to the right view, the side view, and I want to limit its thickness. So I'm going to draw a mask marquee right here. I do not want that alpha as part of it, so I'm going to undo that mask, make sure that I turn off the alpha, Control, click and drag to give myself that rectangular masking marquee, and then that limits the thickness of that item. Now I'll exit out of Shadowbox, and here I have a piece of geometry based on that higher resolution Shadowbox. So I'm going to show you a neat way that you can further add interest and changes to this shape. I'm going to turn on the floor plane. I'm going to make sure that I turn on the Y plane, and I'm going to turn on the X plane. So everything's off but the X plane. Now I'm going to go to Draw. I'm going to make sure that that X plane, I'm going to set that to 0. So this is going to be the mirror axis for this object. So I'm going to take the transpose line, move this over, the transpose gizmo I mean. Now I'm going to go to Geometry, Modify Topology, and I've got Mirrored and Weld across the x-axis. So if I click that, it will mirror that shape across and weld those points together. You can see it's cut a new edge and welded those points. Let's undo that. I could do it across multiple axes. I can do X and Y. If I do that, I get this type of shape. So it's a really nice way to create abstract, interesting, more complex designs. Now Shadowbox allows you to create all sorts of shapes like this. If I go back to the Polystar, go back to Geometry, go to Shadowbox, let's turn our resolution and turn on Shadowbox. It'll automatically generate a mask based on the star. So I clear that. And I'm going to come down here to the Texture menu. Under Texture Map, I can click and select this texture, which is the front, back, side, bottom view. You'll find this texture within the Projects folder in the Zbrush Install folder. Or when you load up that default shadow box, you can just select this texture from here and export it so you have access to it elsewhere. What we can do is we can load this texture up into Photoshop, and we can actually put an image on here and then generate based on that image. So let's take a look at how to do that now. I'm going to open up Photoshop. Now here in Photoshop, I have that template image open. I'm going to create a new layer, layer 1, and I'm just going to fill it with white by pressing Ctrl A and then Alt Delete while white is my active color. Now I'm going to turn off visibility on that white layer. I'll turn it on before I export it. We just want to see the grid while we're actually making our object. So let's open up that stencil again. So let's grab that stencil. Right there. I'm going to select it and copy it. I'm going to paste it into this document and then transform it and scale it down. And we're just going to place it on the view here. Now I'm going to turn the white background back on, and I'm just going to merge these layers together. Now I'm going to save this as template. Now we'll return to Zbrush. I'll go to the Texture Map under the Tool menu, and I'll click Import. From Import, I'm going to go back to my project files here and grab that template image that we just saved out. And you see that loads onto the object with that image of the tattoo pattern on the corresponding image plane for that shadow box. So now we'll go to the masking menu, and we will go to Mask by Color, Mask by Intensity, and that's going to mask based on the color intensity. So if I come over here and draw a new mask, we will get geometry based on the image that we created on the template in Photoshop. So let's go ahead and accept that by clicking Shadowbox, and there's our object. So any black and white image that you can load into Photoshop and paste into that guide template, you can use to establish your shapes. So if you have profiles drawn on your item, you can load those up like a front, side, top views. You can load those up and then generate your mesh based on those profile silhouettes just by masking by intensity. So let's take a look at how we can use this shape in an interesting way. So here I've loaded back in the alien with his helmet, and I'm going to append that insignia in as a subtool. We'll select that, take the transpose gizmo, and let's move that out, turn off perspective, and I'm just going to orient it so it's sort of looking straight down at the surface beneath. I'm going to unlock this, and I'm going to set the pivot to the unmasked center and then lock it again. and just make sure that we have it lined up more or less perpendicular to the surface underneath, as close as you can get it. And there we go. Now I'm going to zoom into this, make sure perspective is turned off, and I'm going to go B for brush, M for matchmaker, and select the matchmaker brush. I will click, zoom out a little bit, and then I will click in the center of the current subtool, which is the insignia, and then drag out, letting go on the background. And what that's now done is, as you can see, it's warped the object to the shape underneath it. So let's do that again. Flattening out again. Here you see we've got our insignia, and we've got our helmet right there. Just turn off visibility on all the other objects, so it's just these two items. Click on the insignia, drag, and let go off the model, and it's matching it to the surface underneath. So if I take transpose, I can countersink that, and it should line up right up with that surface, as you can see there. So it's perfect for taking insignia, tracery, all sorts of different sort of decorative motifs, and conforming it to the shape beneath it. Now let's go ahead and change the material on this. Let's give it a shiny material. Go to Material, Color, Fill Object. Now any object can be match made into the object beneath it. All you do is just place it, orient it so it's looking down the projection angle, and then use your matchmaker brush to click and drag, letting go off the surface. And that should conform that to whatever shape is underneath it. So let's turn on the head and the eyeballs again. And here we've got an interesting insignia on this alien's helmet that was created using Shadowbox. And the helmet was created using mesh extraction. So those are two ways of generating your own objects inside of Zbrush using masking-based geometry production. With mesh extraction, you're simply painting a mask on the mesh and extracting the shape. And with Shadowbox, you're painting a mask onto a shadow box, which then generates geometry based on that mask. So hopefully these have been helpful and you found this video informative. These are very powerful tools, especially when we're creating props and costume elements. I use them very, very often when I am having to add accoutrement, buttons, insignia, different bits and pieces. One more thing I want to mention though before we end, if we go back to our Shadowbox item, go to Geometry, let's create another Shadowbox, leave it at 512. I just want to show you one thing that I think is quite neat. Let's turn off frame mode, and let's change our material back to basic material 2. When I'm painting masks in here, sometimes I'll go to Transform, and I will turn on Symmetry, turn on Radial Symmetry, and what this does is it gives me a radial symmetry. So I'm painting in a circular pattern. So if I hold down the masking brush, I'll make sure that I'm on the standard, the freehand mask. There we go. Let's fix our mask brush, put that on mask pen. There we go. Mask. There we go. If we mask here with radial symmetry turned on, we can create some very interesting spiral type designs. Let's come down here. Let's draw a new mask here. Let's turn on transparency so we can see through it. And then what we might do is just erase out some masking here. Erase out some masking here, and you can create really interesting kind of gears or teeth or throwing star weapons. It's a really nice way to create radially symmetrical spiral compositions, which frankly would be a bit of a pain to model under other circumstances. So let's go ahead and accept that by exiting out of Shadowbox, and that type of shape is very easy to generate just by using radial symmetry. If we go to the clip brush now, go to the clip rectangle, and we can clip this, like this. Oops, I need to do it the other way, do the rectangle down the center. So using clip brush down the center, there we go, and so that will thin that out. There we go. And that could be a bit of jewelry, or like I said, a spoke or a weapon. These types of shapes, when you're using radial symmetry, are a lot of fun to create, and I think this is the easiest way to make something like that. So thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next chapter.